Tip number 1. For each passage, read the questions first before you jump into reading the passage. Research shows that this can boost your score. And tip number 2 is also, before you jump into reading, look at any pictures or graphs or images before you read the passage, because this can help you figure out what the topic is and help prime the pump, so to speak, as to what's coming up in the passage. Now, the third tip is to read that title before you start reading the passage. And in the heat of the moment with the clock ticking down, a lot of people skip this, but you really should try to make sure you read that title, because the title often has helpful information in it. It can also help to do this because you'll want to watch for places where words that are in the title show up in the story, as these can often be important points in the story that you might get questions on. And tip number 4, whenever you start reading about a topic, ask yourself what you know about the topic already, and sometimes you won't know anything. But the point is, you want to do this, and the reason is because connecting what you already know to what you're about to learn is going to help you speed up your comprehension. By speeding up your comprehension, hopefully you're going to get a better score. Now, tip number 5 is to have a plan for reading the passages. And you might be wondering, well, what's my plan? I don't have a plan. Well, I'm going to give you some right now. So the first approach to reading the passages is what I call the standard approach, and it's simply what it sounds like. You're going to read the passage the whole way through. Ideally, this is the approach that you'll use, and this is what I recommend most people go into the test as their game plan. But the problem is that sometimes you'll run out of time. And this is where the second method, which I call the seek and destroy method, comes in. Rather than reading that whole passage, you're just going to read the questions and then skim through the passage until you find the parts of the passage that can answer that question, and you repeat this as much as you can. The test writers write certain questions, they design certain questions so that you can't use this to get every question right. But note that it can be effective, so definitely if you're running out of time, go ahead and use this method. Champion tip number 6 here that I'm about to give you is to try to focus on understanding the story as you read. And don't worry too much about the specific details, because you'll be able to look back in the passage to answer those. And I recommend that you don't rely on your memory. Whenever you have time, always go back in the passage and check your answers. Now, tip number 7 here is to try not to spend too much time on any one question. Sometimes it's better to just guess and just cut your loss and move on. Try to maximize your score on other questions. So this brings us to tip number 8 here, which has to do with keeping track of the characters. And so if you have trouble with reading comprehension, as many people do, so don't feel like you're alone in that, that's actually a very common thing I get questions about. What I want you to do is, here's a strategy that will work in some cases. All right, mentally divide characters up into either good or bad characters. For example, an obvious one would be the character Batman and the Joker. It's pretty obvious. Batman's the good guy, Joker's the bad guy. Not all stories are going to have a clear villain. Sometimes the character might have a conflict against themselves, like maybe mental health, like depression or something like that, or they have some personal challenge, or it could be a conflict against nature, like someone's lost in the woods and has to survive. But note that it doesn't always work perfectly, because sometimes a good character will become bad, or a bad character will do something that's good, and vice versa. So note when these happen in the text. So tip number 9 is to figure out the setting. And the setting is way more important than what a lot of people realize. But if you're not sure what I mean by setting, first note that the setting is where the story is taking place, and the setting also includes that time period when it's taking place. And if it's a fiction passage, chances are that you're going to get stories that took place a long time ago. So a lot of the writing style and word usage on the test is probably going to be like older English, because a lot of times they use older stories, although you might see some more recent stuff too. But just note that the setting is really, really, really important, and you might point blank be asked a question about the setting. What's the setting of the story? You might get a question or two that asks you that, but whether or not you get questions on the setting, I want you to go into every passage thinking, okay, what's the setting? What's the setting? And the reason is because this is going to help you get a more clear picture of what's happening, because if you're not clear on what the setting is, then how are you going to picture what's happening in the story accurately? And this brings me to tip number 10, which is try to picture what's happening as you read as if you're watching a movie. Now, with practice, you can get better at this. Some people seem to be naturally a little bit better at visualizing than others, so maybe this tip won't work for you, but I'm just throwing this out here that visualizing as you read is a good way to remember what's going on. Tip number 11, I should say, says that you might get a question or two asking you to select the correct order of events in a passage. So I want you to be aware of that. And why should you be aware of that? Well, remember earlier how I talked about that seek and destroy method? And I said that some questions are designed to beat students that are using that seek and destroy method. Certainly the way to beat these questions, though, is just to read and focus on the events or the actions that are taking place as you're reading. So let's keep rolling here. Tip number 12. If you're stuck and you have to guess, the answer choice that's most likely to be right is the longest answer. All right. And the reason for this is because when test writers make up the questions, oftentimes they'll start by writing out the correct answer, and then they'll just get kind of lazy and they'll have to make up several fake answers, and they don't really put that much effort into writing those fake answers, so oftentimes you'll see that it's a little bit shorter. And so the next tip is also for guessing. This is tip number 13. It says answers with words that match the passage are often correct, but again, there's no guarantee. All right, like I said, you only want to guess as a last resort, but I've just shown here an example here. You know, whenever you see a part of the passage that's got a word or two in it, and those words or word match one of the words in an answer choice, that could be the answer you want to guess if you're completely stumped. The next tip is tip number 14. When multiple answer choices seem like they could be correct, you want to go with whichever one seems most right. And this is, you'll commonly get questions that say which of the following is the best inference or which of the following is most likely right, and you'll see several answer choices. You just have to kind of think critically, maybe kind of make tallies. Like if you're down to answer choice A and B, think of all the reasons why A could be correct. So you might have, let's see, 1, 2, 3 reasons why A is correct, and for B you can think of 6 reasons why B is correct. All right. In that case, probably you'd want to guess B, right? All right, and that's along those same lines. Process of elimination is a really valuable strategy, and the reason why is if you've got 4 answer choices, A, B, C, and D, if you can just take 2 of them down, you've already got a 50-50 chance of guessing. So that's like a heads or tails flipping a coin type of scenario. So tip number 15, pay attention whenever the setting changes as you read. Okay, you could be picturing a scene in the wrong place, and that's going to throw everything off and throw off your comprehension. 16 is to prepare yourself ahead of time for questions about the theme. The theme is just the message that the writer wants to communicate to you, the reader. The theme is usually a statement about human nature or how the world works. And I keep saying question today. It's champion tip number 17 is to pay close attention to who the characters are in the story, and especially interactions with other characters and what the characters are doing. Tip number 18 is to focus on the SCCT. We've talked about these 4 things, setting, characters, conflict, and theme already. It's going to help you understand the information by breaking it into smaller, more manageable chunks. So let's keep moving here with tip number 19, which is to understand dialogue. And if you don't know what dialogue means, I'm not talking about a type of clock or anything like that. I'm talking about dialogue, which the definition here is conversation between 2 or more people. It gives us deeper insight into the plot, into the characters. So tip number 20 is to try to think of a single word to remember each character. The idea is to try to make that word as visual as possible. And I just want to give you a quick example here from this story, The Indian Camp by Hemingway. There's a character named Uncle George who smokes cigars, so the one word I would pick for that character would just be cigars, all right? Main character is Nick, he's the son, and Nick's father is a doctor. So see how just by remembering, if I tell you Uncle George and you picture some guy with a cigar, if I tell you Nick's father, you picture that person as a doctor, it's going to help you keep the characters straight. Tip number 21, pay attention to whether a question is asking you which of the following is false versus which of the following is true. Sometimes you can pick out keywords in the answer choices and find those keywords and phrases in the passage, like I've shown you here. It says, which of the following is false? I would just go down through these and I would say A is asking about musicians. You find that word in the passage, you read that sentence, and you think, is this true or false based off of what it says? So tip 22 is to know the difference between the main idea and supporting ideas. Now the main idea is just the main point of that paragraph, and it's usually found in one sentence, and it's typically going to be the first or the last sentence, but not always. Repetition is a good clue that you found the main idea. And one way to think about the main idea is to look at a paragraph or a story and just think, what title would I give this? If I was going to write a title, if this was a book or a movie, what title would I give it? Supporting ideas just support that main idea. If you get in the habit of pausing and asking, what was the main idea? What were 2 supporting ideas? Try to put it in your own words. It's going to boost your comprehension. Okay, so the next tip is to have a strategy for how you're going to manage your time on the multiple choice section of the test. You should note that the GED RLA section, Reasoning Through Language Arts, or RLA, it's 150 minutes long, and there's 45 minutes for the essay. So let's disclude the essay here, and we're focusing just on that multiple choice for now. Subtracting those gives us 105 minutes. So let's say you're going to have about 105 minutes for the multiple choice. Now, there's going to usually be 46 questions, but again, depending on which version you get, you might get 45, might get 47, might be some variation, but as a general rule of thumb, 46 is what you can expect. This comes out to 2 minutes and 16 seconds for each question. So if you're pacing yourself on the RLA, you'd want to spend 2 minutes and 16 seconds on each question. And the problem though is that you're going to have to also read those passages, right? So you're not going to have probably exactly 2 minutes and 16 seconds per question, unfortunately. Before you read a passage, all right, you want to click through, quickly check how many questions that passage has. And you double that number or you multiply it by 2. That's going to give you a good idea of how much time you can spend reading that passage and answering those questions all together. Let's say that you've got a passage on your test, you click through, you see, okay, there's 4 questions on this passage. What's double 4? Or in other words, what's 4 times 2? That's 8. You'd want to try to read that passage and answer the questions for that passage in 8 minutes. So when I say multiply by 2, that would be for 2 minutes instead of 2 minutes and 16 seconds because that gives you a little bit of time buffer here, all right? And if this just confused you more, and then don't worry about it, I don't want to add stress. So the next tip here is to think and ask questions as you read. And the reason you want to do this is because the deeper you can process as you read, the more you'll understand the story, and the better you understand the story, all right, hopefully you'll get a better score. Now, the next tip, 25, is to pay attention to lists, and whenever you see lists while reading on your test, just note where they are in the text. Lists are often a source of questions, not always. Again, there's no guarantee on which questions you'll get on your version of the test, but you might get a question that has to do with a list. All right, thank you so much for watching. I have a video where I break down the RAP paraphrasing strategy. It's a good video for reading comprehension. I'll put that right here if you'd like to click on that and see that now. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I really appreciate it. Good luck on your test.